Her life was worth less than a bullet. In the town of Red Creek, lost amidst the endless prairies where justice was often delivered by the cry of a mob rather than the strike of a gavel, a rope had already been woven for Nurse Sarah Collins. It took only one day, a single day, from dawn till dusk for rumors, suspicions, and outright lies to fester into a death sentence. One not passed in a courtroom, but on the dusty streets and in the smoke-filled saloon. They had declared her a poisoner, a witch in a white bonnet, and now they thirsted for retribution. Dr. William Thatcher heard the roar. It seeped through the cracks in his office windows, mingling with the furious lament of the autumn rain. The town, usually sleepy and languid, had become a disturbed hive, and every bee carried the venom of hatred. William methodically, almost meditatively, wiped his surgical instruments, arranging them on a clean linen cloth. Scalpels, clamps, forceps. The cold steel in his hands was the only island of order in an ocean of encroaching chaos. He knew Sarah Collins. She was not just a nurse, she was his finest student, the one whose hands were as steady and sure as his own, whose knowledge surpassed that of many doctors he had met in his life. And the thought that those hands could take a life, it simply wouldn't fit in his mind. It was absurd, sacrilegious memory. That merciless surgeon cut open the events of the previous day, again and again. Old man Abernathy, a wealthy ranch owner whose body was racked with swamp fever. He was dying, slowly and painfully. William had prescribed the standard treatment of the time quinine to fight the fever and a tincture of opium laudanum to ease the suffering. It was a delicate balance, a walk on a knife's edge. Too little, and the patient would burn up in agony. Too much, and his heart would stop forever. He and Sarah had measured the dosage with an apothecary's precision. He trusted her with it, as he trusted himself. But this morning, Abernathy had been found dead, and next to his bed, an empty laudanum vial. The vial that Sarah had filled. The knock on the door was so desperate and sharp that William flinched, nearly dropping a scalpel. He froze, listening to the storm outside and the storm within. The knock came again, more insistent, more desperate. It couldn't be a patient. On a night like this, no one would leave their home without dire need, and they certainly wouldn't knock as if the devil himself were at their heels. Then again, perhaps he was. William went to the door and opened it just a hand's breadth, ready to slam it shut at any moment. She was on his doorstep. Sarah Collins, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to a deathly pale face, but her eyes burned, not with fear, but with a fierce, irreconcilable fire. She was not crying. She looked like a cornered wolf, ready to tear out the throat of the first person to reach for her. William, she breathed, her voice a hoarse whisper of the wind. Let me in, please. He hesitated for a moment. Letting her in meant signing his own death warrant. It meant defying the entire town, defying Mayor Thorne, who was the first to cry out Sarah's guilt, defying the sheriff, who was merely a puppet in the mayor's hands. But he looked into her eyes and did not see a murderer. He saw the same girl who had come to him 3 years ago, timid yet full of resolve, wanting to dedicate her life to helping others. They're looking for you, Sarah, he said in a low voice, letting her inside and quickly bolting the heavy door. I know. She stood in the middle of his office, water dripping from her, forming a dark puddle on the floor. I didn't kill him. William, you have to believe me. You're the only one who can. He looked at her, at this fragile figure who had challenged the entire world, and he knew that his calm, measured life had ended the moment he turned the key in the lock. Somewhere in the distance, growing ever closer, came the sound of barking, dogs and angry shouts. The mob was on her trail, and that trail had led them straight to his door. If you, like me, believe in a justice that sometimes requires unimaginable courage, give this video a like. William led her deeper into the house, away from the windows that faced the main street. The roar of the mob grew more distinct, transforming from an abstract threat into a real, palpable danger. He poured her a glass of whiskey. Her hands trembled so much, he feared she would drop it. But Sarah took a large, burning gulp, and a faint blush touched her cheeks. The fire in her eyes blazed even brighter. Tell me, he commanded, his voice calm, but with a steely edge. Tell me everything, from the beginning. Don't leave out a single detail. And she began her story. She spoke of old man Abernathy's final hours, of how he tossed and turned in his delirium, how his body was racked with convulsions. She gave him the prescribed dose of laudanum, exactly as much as they had discussed. He grew quiet, and she thought he had fallen asleep. She sat with him for another hour, checking his pulse, which was weak but steady. And then he arrived, Jedediah Thorne, the mayor's son. At the mention of that name, William tensed. Jedediah was a rot, skillfully concealed by expensive suits and his father's money, a drunkard, a brawler, and a coward, whose amusements often ended in injuries for others and a complete lack of consequences for himself. He demanded I go with him, Sarah continued, her voice trembling for the first time that evening. Said one of his friends in the saloon had broken an arm, and I had to set it immediately, secretly, so the sheriff wouldn't find out about another brawl. And you refused. It was not a question, but a statement. William knew her principles. She would not provide aid to a drunken thug while leaving a dying patient. Of course, I refused. I told him I couldn't leave Mr. Abernathy. He became furious. Sarah swallowed hard, as if the words were stuck in her throat. He shouted that I was just a servant, that I had to obey the Thorne family's orders, that he would grind me into dust. He grabbed my arm. I pulled away and told him to get out. He left, but before he did, he looked at the table by the bed, at the medicine vials, and he smirked. God, William, I can still see that smirk. William remained silent, piecing the puzzle together. It all fit. Humiliated by the refusal, drunk and angry, Jedediah was capable of anything. A human life meant nothing to him, especially when his wounded pride was at stake. Pouring the rest of the opium tincture down a semi-conscious old man's throat would take only a few seconds. And then, raising a cry, blaming the nurse who dared to defy him. The perfect crime. Mayor Thorne would use all his influence to protect his son and make Sarah the scapegoat. Why didn't you tell the sheriff this? William asked, though he already knew the answer. Sarah laughed bitterly. The sheriff, Sheriff Henderson, who eats out of the mayor's hand. I tried. When they found the body this morning and the mayor and sheriff ran in, I tried to say Jedediah had been here. Mayor Thorne slapped me so hard I fell. Then he screamed that I was a lying wretch trying to tarnish his son's name to save my own skin. No one even listened. The picture was clear and terrible in its simplicity. The word of an orphan nurse against the word of the all-powerful founding family of the town. She never stood a chance. Write in the comments what you would have done in his place. Would you have believed her, or been too afraid to go against the entire town? The shouts outside grew louder. Now individual voices could be distinguished. They were chanting her name, mixing it with curses. Poisoner. Witch. Bring her out. William went to the window and, carefully pulling back the edge of the heavy curtain, peered out onto the street. The rain had not let up, but it did not stop the mob. Dozens of people with torches and lanterns stood before his house. Their faces, twisted with rage and lit by the dancing flames, looked demonic. Among them was Sheriff Henderson, feebly trying to maintain a semblance of order, and Mayor Thorne, who stood on the porch of his house across the street, watching the fruits of his labor with satisfaction. They knew Sarah would go to him, to the only person in Red Creek who might doubt her guilt. They've surrounded the house, he said, stepping away from the window. His face was like a stone mask, but a cold resolve flickered in his eyes. He had made his decision. What are we going to do? Sarah whispered, but William did not answer. He walked to the large bookcase, filled with medical treatises and tomes. His hands confidently found a specific volume on the third shelf. He pulled it towards him, and nothing happened. He frowned, pulling harder. With a creak that sounded deafening to them, the entire section of the bookcase swung forward, revealing a dark, narrow passage behind it. A smell of dampness and dust wafted out. It's an old wine cellar, he explained quietly. My grandfather was paranoid and built it during the time of the Indian raids. No one knows about it. Go in there. There's an old blanket. Wait for me. And no matter what you hear, don't come out. Not a sound. Do you understand me, Sarah? She nodded, her eyes wide with surprise and a glimmer of hope. She quickly stepped into the dark opening. Before he slid the bookcase back into place, she grabbed his hand. William, thank you. There's nothing to thank me for yet. He cut her off. Just do as I say. The bookcase scraped back into place, hiding the secret that now bound them both. William stood frozen for a few seconds, listening. Silence. Only his own heart hammered in his chest. He quickly surveyed the room, picked up the glass Sarah had drunk from, wiped it, and put it away. Then he poured himself a whiskey in another glass and walked to the door. A deafening blow struck the door, making it shudder. "Dr. Thatcher, in the name of the law, open up," roared Sheriff Henderson's voice. William took a deep breath, drained his glass, and putting on the calmest, most slightly irritated expression he could muster, opened the door. The mob fell silent. In front stood the sheriff with a revolver in his hand, and behind him, the most active townspeople shuffled from foot to foot, clutching pitchforks and hunting rifles. Sheriff Williams said calmly, leaning against the doorframe, "Can't you knock like civilized people? You nearly tore the door off its hinges." "Save your manners, Doc," Henderson snarled. "We're looking for Sarah Collins. She was seen in this area. Is she with you?" Williams swept the crowd with a cold, contemptuous gaze. He let it rest on Mayor Thorne, who had come down from his porch and now stood in the front row. "Are you telling me that this procession," he paused, choosing the most venomous word, "has trespassed on my private property in the middle of the night to ask if I've seen a fugitive?" "No, Sheriff, I have not seen her. And now, if you don't mind, I've had a difficult day and I would like to rest." He began to close the door, but the sheriff's heavy boot blocked the opening. "We don't believe you, Thatcher. You've always defended her. We're going to search the house." William's heart skipped a beat. He knew this would happen, but outwardly, he remained unfazed. He slowly opened the door. "Search? On what grounds do you have a warrant?" "I don't need a warrant when it's about justice," someone from the crowd shouted. "Exactly," the sheriff echoed, emboldened by the support. "We know she's in there, and we'll find her." He pushed William aside and stepped inside. The mob surged into the house after him, bringing with them the smell of wet clothes, cheap whiskey, and animal hatred. They were just a few feet from the bookcase, behind which Sarah sat, holding her breath. Every one of their steps thundered in William's ears. "Subscribe so you don't miss how this tense scene ends, and find out if they can find Sarah." Chaos flooded his home like a torrent of muddy water. The people he had treated, whose children he had delivered, whose broken bones he had set, now rummaged through his rooms with the faces of monsters. They knocked over stacks of books, flung open cabinet doors, their boots leaving muddy tracks on the meticulously clean floor. The smell of wet wool, cheap tobacco, and stale sweat filled the air, mingling with the scent of antiseptics. It was a desecration, not just of his home, but of his world, built on logic, science, and order. William stood motionless, a rock in the midst of a raging current. He made no attempt to stop them. Any resistance would have been futile. It would only have fueled their fury. Instead, he observed. His gaze, cold and attentive, scanned the crowd, taking note of each person. He saw Farmer Johnson, whose daughter he had saved from diphtheria last winter. He saw Pete the blacksmith, clutching a hammer in his massive hand, as if he intended to smash not furniture, but skulls. And he saw Mayor Thorne, standing at the entrance, not dirtying his own hands, but conducting this ugly spectacle with just a look. "She's not here," someone shouted from a back room. "Check under the beds." "In the cellar," the Sheriff Henderson bellowed, trying to assert his importance. William's heart momentarily froze when he heard the word cellar, but he meant the ordinary kitchen cellar for produce. Several men clattered down the wooden steps, and soon their disappointed voices echoed from below. They found only potatoes and jars of pickles. The mob poured into his office, his sanctum, the place where he battled death and ignorance. They glanced nervously at the glass jars with specimens preserved in alcohol, at the skeleton in the corner he used to study anatomy. In their eyes, it was akin to black magic. "Look, witchcraft," one of them croaked, pointing a finger at a jar containing a two-headed snake William had bartered from a traveling merchant of curiosities. "It's science, you idiots," William said in an icy tone. His voice carried such authority that several men involuntarily recoiled. "Just because your tiny brains can't comprehend something doesn't necessarily make it evil." His words hit their mark. They faltered, their primal fury clashing with a superstitious fear of an educated man. But Mayor Thorne was not about to lose the initiative. "Enough talk, Thatcher," he intervened, striding into the office. "We know you're in league with her. Where is she?" He swept the office with a heavy gaze, and his eyes settled on the bookcase. William felt a chill run down his spine. Thorne moved closer, running his fingers over the spines of the books. He wasn't as foolish as the others. He was searching. At that very moment, in the complete darkness beneath the floor, Sarah Collins sat with her arms wrapped around her knees. She tried to breathe evenly, to barely breathe at all. Every footstep above her head resounded like a clap of thunder. She heard muffled shouts, the crash of overturned furniture. She imagined them bursting into the office, and her heart clenched. In terror, dust, disturbed from above, sifted through the cracks in the ceiling, tickling her nostrils. She clamped a hand over her mouth and nose, terrified of making the slightest sound, of sneezing. The smell of damp earth and mold was suffocating, but it was the smell of life, the smell of temporary salvation. She heard William's voice, calm and cold. He was her only shield, and she prayed that this shield would hold. What would you feel? In her place, locked in darkness while your fate is decided above by the thud of boots and angry shouts. Above, the final act of the drama was unfolding. One of the mayor's cronies, a lanky and clumsy fellow named Silas, reached for the very tome that served as the lever. "Well now, let's see what we have here," he muttered, his curiosity fueled by the whiskey he had drunk at the saloon. "Don't touch that." William's voice wasn't loud, but it held a note that made Silas snatch his hand back as if from a hot iron. All eyes turned to the doctor. He slowly approached the bookcase. "Those aren't just books, Silas," he said, looking the man directly in the eye. "Those are European medical journals, in German and Latin. If you damage them, I will send the bill to your father. I'm sure he wouldn't want to sell half his livestock to pay for your curiosity." He was bluffing. The books were valuable, but not that valuable. However, the threat of hitting the wallet always worked in this town. Silas backed away in embarrassment. Mayor Thorne looked at William with unconcealed hatred. He knew he was losing this battle. The search had yielded nothing. The mob was beginning to lose its fervor, their rage giving way to fatigue and disappointment. "She's not here," the sheriff stated, wiping sweat from his brow. He was clearly eager to get out of there. "We'll be back," Thatcher, Thorne hissed, pointing a finger at the doctor. "And when we find her, we'll hang her, and everyone who sheltered her. Remember that." He turned and left. The crowd, like a flock of sheep following its shepherd, trailed after him. The last to leave was the sheriff. "We'll be watching the house, Doc," he threw over his shoulder. "She can't hide forever." Finally, the door slammed shut. The noise subsided. William listened for a few more minutes until the footsteps and voices faded into the distance. He went to the door and slid the heavy bolt into place. Then he returned to his office and leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. Only now did he allow himself to realize how close they had come to failure. His hands were trembling slightly. He poured himself another whiskey and drank it in one gulp. The house was a wreck. Disorder reigned everywhere, but it didn't matter. The important thing was that they had bought time. He went to the bookcase and pulled the lever again. The section slid aside silently. "Sarah, you can come out." She emerged from the darkness like a ghost, pale, smeared with dust and cobwebs, but alive. There were tears in her eyes, but they were tears of relief, not fear. She looked at the devastation in the office, then at him. "They believed you," she whispered. "This time," he corrected. "They're gone, but they'll be back. Thorne won't rest. We're under siege." "Sarah," he helped her out and pushed the bookcase back. He brought her water and a clean towel. While she cleaned herself up, he began to methodically clean up the mess from the raid, restoring things to their proper order. It calmed him, helped him think. "They'll be watching the house," she said, her voice stronger. The fear was receding, replaced by a cold resolve. "I can't stay here. I'm putting you in danger." "And where would you go?" he asked reasonably. "Into the prairie, at night, in the rain. They'll organize a posse, and by morning you'll be swinging from a noose. No, the safest place for you right now is here, where they've already looked. But we need a plan. We need to prove your innocence. But how? It's my word against the mayor's son. Words are powerless. We need facts. Proof." William rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Think, Sarah. When Jedediah was with Abernathy, did he touch anything? Drop anything? Maybe leave something behind?" She shook her head desperately. "I don't know. I was so scared, so angry. I wasn't paying attention." He grabbed my arm. Then he looked at the medicines. She fell silent, her eyes widening. She was looking not at William, but through him, replaying that terrible scene in her mind. "The vial," she whispered. "The laudanum vial. When I gave Mr. Abernathy the medicine, there was a label on it. I wrote it myself that morning, with the dosage and time. But when the sheriff showed me the empty vial in the morning, there was no label. I thought it had peeled off, or maybe I just didn't notice, but now I understand." He tore it off. William Froze, it was a detail, a small thing. But in matters like these, it's the small things that decide everything. Why would he tear off the label? He mused aloud. So there'd be no proof of what dose was prescribed, Sarah exclaimed. To make it look like I deliberately poured the entire contents into him. Perhaps, William agreed. But that still doesn't prove he did it. But if he didn't just tear it off, but took it with him, and threw it away somewhere. Suddenly, his gaze fell to the floor near the entrance to the office, where the mob had stood. Midst the mud and wet boot prints lay a tiny, barely noticeable object, something that didn't belong in his house. William slowly bent down and picked it up. It was a cufflink, not a simple pewter one worn by the common townsfolk, but an expensive one, made of silver with an intricate engraving, the initials J. Jedediah Thorne. He showed it to Sarah. Her expression changed. It's his, she breathed. I saw them on his cuffs when he grabbed my arm. It must have torn off in the struggle. They looked at each other. They had proof, irrefutable proof. But this proof was both their salvation and their death sentence. To try and use it meant declaring open war on Mayor Thorne. And in that war, they had no allies. The entire town was against them. What are we going to do? Sarah asked again. But now her voice held not only hope, but also the understanding of a new, even more terrifying danger. Now, William said slowly, clutching the cold metal of the cufflink in his palm, we go on the attack. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because, in the next part of this story, Dr. Thatcher and Sarah will shift from defense to offense, and their plan will be riskier than any poison, and sharper than any scalpel. You won't want to miss it. Dawn stole into Red Creek like a thief, painting the wet rooftops in shades of grey and lead. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy and damp, smelling of wet earth and decaying leaves. A tense silence reigned in Dr. Thatcher's house, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. They sat at the kitchen table, separated by the light of a single kerosene lamp. Between them, on the rough oak wood, lay the silver cufflink. In the dim light, it looked as ominous as a dead man's eye. It was their only ace in a game where the opponent held all the cards. William turned it over in his fingers, feeling the cold metal. The cufflink was proof that Jedediah Thorne had been in Abernathy's room, but it didn't prove murder. To the bloodthirsty mob, it would just be a trinket, another trick from the cunning doctor trying to protect his witch of an assistant. They won't believe us, Sarah said, as if reading his thoughts. Her voice was steady, devoid of yesterday's panic. The night in the dark cellar and the mortal danger had changed her. The fear hadn't disappeared. It had simply compressed, turning into a cold, hard core inside her. If we just show them this, Mayor Thorne will say you planted it, or that I stole it earlier to slander his son. They'll find 1,000 explanations. You're right, William nodded. He stood up and began to make coffee, his movements as precise and measured as always. The ritual helped him think. The aroma of bitter beans filled the kitchen. A direct confrontation is suicide. We have to make them doubt on their own. We have to plant facts they can't ignore. We must lance this wound, not just put a bandage on it. He poured 2 mugs of the steaming beverage. Our first step is to sow doubt. Our second is to make Jedediah expose himself. But how? Sarah took the hot mug, her fingers gripping the ceramic. Your house is under surveillance. I'm a prisoner here. And Jedediah, he's probably sleeping soundly in his soft bed right now, celebrating his victory. Celebrating, but not sleeping soundly. William countered. He's a coward, Sarah, and cowards are afraid of shadows. He made a mistake by leaving the cup. He's probably realized he lost it by now, and he'll be nervous, and a nervous man makes more mistakes. His plan began to take shape, cold and sharp as a scalpel. I am a doctor, and the town needs a doctor, whether they like it or not. Sooner or later, someone will get sick or break a leg, and they will come to me. That will give me a reason to leave the house. And when I go out, I will do 2 things. First, I will go to my apothecary. Second, I will visit one person. The person who last saw Abernathy's body after you and I did. Who? The undertaker, Silas Blackwood. Sarah frowned. Why him? He's quiet and keeps to himself. Exactly. He sees everything and says nothing. But 3 years ago, his wife was dying of childbed fever. The whole town said she was doomed. I didn't leave her side for 3 days, and she survived. Silas Blackwood owes me. I won't ask for his help directly. I'll just ask him a few questions. About the body, about whether he noticed anything strange. just to make him think. He's a meticulous man. If a doubt takes root in his mind, it will grow. The plan was risky, built on insinuation and psychology, but it was all they had. The opportunity came sooner than they expected. Less than an hour later, there was a timid knock at the door. It was Mrs. Henderson, the sheriff's wife. Her young son was burning with fever and swallowing her fear and her husband's contempt. She had run for help. William packed his medical bag. Before leaving, he looked at Sarah. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone. I'll try to be back as soon as possible." He hid the cufflink in a secret pocket of his waistcoat. Stepping outside, he immediately felt the stares. Two of the sheriff's deputies, who had been lounging against the opposite wall, straightened up. Neighbors who had come out onto their porches watched him in icy silence. The atmosphere was so thick you could cut it with a knife. He walked past the lookouts without even a glance and headed for the sheriff's house. While he examined the child, a common cold, nothing serious, he acted as if nothing was wrong. He was polite to the frightened mother, gave her fever-reducing medicine and instructions. But his every word, every gesture was part of the game. He knew that Mrs. Henderson would report his every action to her husband, and his calm demeanor, his professionalism, was the first seed of doubt. Does a man hiding a murderer act this way? "I need to stop by the apothecary to mix another tonic for your boy," he told her as he left. It was the perfect excuse. The apothecary was next to his office. When he entered, he saw that the mob had been here too. Several jars were broken, and scattered herbs lay on the floor, but he paid it no mind. He quickly gathered the few ingredients he needed, and then, under the cover of a tall shelf, he took what he had really come for, a small dose of an emetic and a powerful sleeping powder that took effect not immediately, but after some time. He didn't know exactly how he would use them, but his intuition told him they would be needed. His next stop was Silas Blackwood's funeral parlor. It stood on the edge of town, always in shadow, always quiet. Inside it smelled of varnish, formaldehyde, and wilted flowers. Silas, a tall, thin man with sad eyes, was planing a board for a new coffin. He looked up when William entered. "Doctor." He nodded without surprise. "Silas," William approached. "I've come about Mr. Abernathy." The undertaker didn't stop his work. Shavings fell to the floor in neat curls. "He'll be buried tomorrow. If the mob doesn't tear that girl to pieces first. I want to ask you a question, Silas, as one professional to another. When you were preparing the body, did you notice anything unusual? Something that doesn't fit the picture of laudanum poisoning?" Silas froze for a moment, his hands still. He gave William a long, piercing look. "Death from opium is a quiet death. The breathing slows. The person just falls asleep. The body is relaxed. But old man Abernathy, he was tense all over. His jaw was clenched so tight I could barely open it. And on his neck, under his chin, I noticed a small bruise, as if someone had forced his head back." William's heart beat faster. This was another detail, a crucial one. Jedediah hadn't just poured the poison. He had struggled with the dying man. "Did you tell the sheriff?" Silas gave a bitter smile and returned to his work. "Why?" "So I could be accused of being an accomplice. I'm an undertaker, Doc. My job is to bury the dead, not to find justice for them. I saw the bruise, and I powdered it. Now no one will see it. But you know the truth, Silas. Knowing the truth and being able to prove it are two different things. Leave this town, Doctor, you and that girl. Nothing good will come for you here." William knew he wouldn't get any more out of him, but he had accomplished the main thing. He had made Silas talk, and now that knowledge would sit inside the undertaker like a splinter, while William played his dangerous game in town. Sarah was not idle. Left alone in the locked house, she fought waves of panic. The silence was oppressive. Every creak of the floorboards made her jump. To distract herself, she decided to do what she did best, bring order. She cleaned up the dirt left by the mob, put books back in their places. As she was dusting in the office, her gaze fell again on the bookcase that hid her sanctuary. She walked over and ran a hand over the spines, and then it hit her. She remembered another detail from that night. When Jedediah Thorne had burst into Abernathy's room, he wasn't just drunk, he was bragging. He was shouting that his father had bought him a new stallion, a purebred Mustang, and that tomorrow morning he was going to break it in at the far pasture near Snake Canyon. It was meaningless drunken chatter, but now, in the silence of the house, those words took on a new meaning. The far pasture, a secluded place. If Jedediah is nervous, if he's afraid of being exposed, where would he go to calm his nerves or hide evidence? To a place where no one would see him. And then she remembered something else. The vial. When she gave the medicine, she held it in her hands. It was almost full. And the empty vial the sheriff had shown her. It was completely dry. But laudanum is a thick, oily tincture. If you pour it out, traces, droplets, will remain on the sides. For the vial to be completely dry, it would have to be rinsed. Why would a murderer rinse a vial? She began to think feverishly. He tore off the label, poured the rest into the old. Man rinsed the vial with water from the pitcher by the bed, and threw it on the floor, all to destroy the evidence. But the label, the tiny paper rectangle with her handwriting, it couldn't have just dissolved. He must have put it somewhere, thrown it out the window, hidden it in his pocket. When William returned, he found not a frightened girl, but a focused investigator. She laid out her deductions for him, about the rinsed vial, about Jedediah's bragging, and the far pasture. William listened to her, and his plan became clearer and more ruthless. "You're a genius, Sarah," he said, which was the highest praise from his lips. "You've given us a place and a motive. He's not just a drunken fool. He's cunning, though impulsive. He tried to cover his tracks, and the label, he most likely stuffed it in his pocket. And then, after sobering up, he realized he was carrying direct evidence, and he'll want to get rid of it. At the far pasture, now they had a goal, to find that label. But the place was several miles from town. William could go there under some pretext, but Jedediah might have already disposed of it, or he might be on his way there now. They needed to act, and act together. "I'd have to go with you," Sarah said firmly. "That's madness. They're looking for you. If you're seen—" "I won't be seen," she interrupted. Her eyes burned with determination. "I know these lands. As a child, I explored every ravine and canyon around Red Creek. I can get there without anyone noticing me." At night, William looked at her and saw not his student, but an equal partner. Her courage was reckless, but contagious, and he knew she was right. Together, they had a better chance. "All right," he finally agreed. "At night, but we need a weapon. Not for attacking, for defense." He took her to his office and opened the bottom drawer of his desk, which was always locked. Inside, on a velvet lining, lay a small, elegant Colt revolver with a mother-of pearl handle, an inheritance from his father. He had never used it. "Do you know how to shoot?" "My father taught me to shoot at bottles," she answered quietly. He handed her the revolver. Her slender fingers wrapped confidently around the grip. At that moment, they ceased to be a doctor and a nurse. They became conspirators, and their next night would either bring them freedom or end their lives. Their plan was daring and almost impossible: to slip out of the besieged house under the cover of darkness, cross the hostile town, reach the secluded canyon, and find a tiny scrap of paper that could be the key to their salvation, before the murderer himself could. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the expedition to Snake Canyon will be the most dangerous night of their lives, and what they find there will change absolutely everything. Night covered Red Creek in a black velvet blanket, studded with cold sparks of stars. The town fell silent, sinking into a restless sleep. But for William and Sarah, the time of wakefulness was just beginning. In the house that had become both her prison and her sanctuary, they prepared for the riskiest venture of their lives. The plan was audacious to the point of madness, but it was the only one they had. "The watchmen are sitting on the porch across the street," William whispered, peering cautiously from behind the curtain. "They've lit a fire in a barrel to keep warm. They'll be there until morning. Then we can't go out the front door," Sarah stated. She was checking the revolver's cylinder, her movements confident, without a hint of doubt. The cold steel in her hands seemed to give her strength. "There is another way." William led her to the secret passage behind the bookcase. "This cellar isn't just a room. My grandfather, as I said, was paranoid. He dug a tunnel that leads to an old, dry well in the backyard. We've never used it, but I know it's there." They descended into the musty darkness. The air was stale, smelling of ancient dust and damp clay. William lit a lantern, and its dim light revealed a low, narrow passage blocked by several planks. The work was hard. The boards were rotten but driven firmly into the ground. They had to use an old crowbar that William kept in the cellar. Every creak of wood, every strike of metal on earth, sounded deafening to them. They would freeze, listening for sounds from above, but the house remained silent. Finally, The passage was open. The tunnel was cramped and low. They had to crawl. On all fours, cobwebs clung to their faces, and dirt got under their fingernails. It was a path of humiliation, a path of escape, but it led to freedom. Sarah crawled first, clutching the revolver. She no longer feared the dark or the tight space. She feared what awaited them outside. The well was exactly where William had said. Old, overgrown with ivy, it was perfect cover. They emerged, finding themselves in the shadow of a large oak tree in the backyard. Now came the most dangerous part. The town. They moved like shadows, from fence to fence, from one dark alley to another. Every dog's bark made their hearts stop. Once, they had to flatten themselves in a muddy ditch as a night patrol passed two townsmen with rifles, self-proclaimed guardians of the peace. Their drunken voices and laughter passed just a few feet from the hidden fugitives. If you've ever felt fear constrict your lungs, write about it in the comments. That at last, they were outside the town limits. The prairie stretched before them, bathed in the ghostly light of the stars. The wind whipped through their hair, carrying the scent of sagebrush and freedom. But it was too early to relax. Snake Canyon lay ahead. They walked for several miles, navigating by the stars. Sarah, as she had promised, knew these lands. She led them along barely visible trails, avoiding ravines and thickets of thorny bushes. William, a city man, struggled to keep up but did not complain. He admired her resilience. This fragile girl proved to be tougher than many men he knew. Snake Canyon greeted them with an eerie silence and bizarre shadows cast by the rocks. It was a secluded, almost mystical place, perfect for hiding a piece of evidence or getting rid of it forever. He said he was going to break in the stallion at the pasture behind the canyon, Sarah whispered. So he must have passed through here. He likely would have stopped at that stream to water the horse. They began their search. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. They scoured every inch of ground by the stream, pushed aside bushes, looked under rocks. Time passed. The sky in the east began to lighten, turning a soft pink. Despair began to set in. Had they been wrong? Had Jedediah already been here and destroyed the label? Or had he thrown it away somewhere else? William, look. Sarah's sudden whisper was like a gunshot. He ran to her. She was standing by an old, thorny hawthorn bush. Caught on one of its thorns, fluttering in the morning breeze, was a tiny white rectangle. William carefully, so as not to tear it, took it down. On the scrap of paper, in Sarah's neat handwriting, were the words, "Tincture of laudanum, Mr. Abernathy, 15 drops. 10 p.m. They had found it. They had found it. In that moment, the relief was so immense that Sarah's legs gave way. William caught her. They looked at each other, and in their eyes was not just victory, but something more, the birth of an unbreakable trust. But their triumph was cut short. The sound of a horse's hooves came from the direction of the town. It was a single rider. Jedediah Thorne, just as they had predicted, had come at dawn to ensure his secret was safely buried. Quick, into the rocks, William commanded. They hid in a crevice between two huge boulders, watching as Jedediah dismounted by the stream. He was pale, his hands trembling slightly. It was clear he had not spent a restful night. He went straight to the hawthorn bush. He fumbled through the branches, his movements growing more and more frantic. Finding nothing, he began to stomp the ground around it in a panic, like a raging bull. "It's gone, it's gone," he muttered to himself, looking for this Jedediah Williams. Voice, calm and cold, struck like a whip. Jedediah spun around, his face contorted in terror when he saw the doctor and Sarah emerging from behind the rocks. William held the tiny label in his hand. Sarah stood slightly behind him. Her hand holding the revolver was lowered, but ready to be raised at any moment. "How did you get here?" he stammered. "That no longer matters. What matters is that we know the truth. You killed old man Abernathy. You poured a fatal dose of laudanum into him because Sarah dared to refuse you." William articulated each word. Lies. It was all her. The witch. Jedediah screamed, but his voice lacked conviction, only animal fear. He reached for the revolver at his belt. "I wouldn't advise that," William said, just as calmly. "We have this." He held up the label, "And we also have this." He took the silver cufflink from his pocket and threw it on the ground in front of Jedediah. Seeing the cufflink, Jedediah finally broke. He knew he was trapped. His face twisted with rage. I'll kill you both, and no one will ever know." He shrieked and drew his revolver, But before he could aim, Sarah raised her hand. A shot rang out. The bullet hit the ground at Jedediah's feet, kicking up a spray of dust. He froze, his eyes wide with surprise. He hadn't expected this quiet nurse to be able to shoot. That moment was all William needed. He lunged forward, not to attack, but to toss a flask he was holding at Jedediah. "You look like you could use a drink, Jedediah," he said. Instinctively, Jedediah caught the flask. In his inflamed mind, it was a sign of a truce, a chance to negotiate. He unscrewed the cap and took a long, greedy swig. The whiskey, which William had laced with the sleeping powder and emetic, burned his throat. He lowered his revolver, his vision blurring. What is this? A few seconds later, nausea overcame him. He dropped his weapon, doubled over, and began to vomit. A minute later, the sleeping powder took effect. His legs buckled, and he collapsed to the ground, unconscious. William picked up his revolver. He looked at Sarah. Her arm, holding the gun, was still extended, trembling slightly. He walked over and gently lowered her hand. "It's over, Sarah. Now we return the town its monster." Their return to Red Creek was both triumphant and terrifying. William rode Jedediah's horse, the murderer's unconscious body slung over the saddle. Sarah walked beside him, her face grim and resolute. As they entered the main street, the townspeople, just beginning their day, froze in astonishment. The rumor spread like a wildfire. 15 minutes later, the entire square in front of the sheriff's office was packed with people. Sheriff Henderson ran out onto the porch, followed by Mayor Thorne. Seeing his son in such a state, the mayor turned pale. "Thatcher, what have you done? You've kidnapped my son," he shouted, trying to regain control of the situation. "I haven't done anything to your son, Mayor," William answered, loud and clear for all to hear. "I've simply brought you Mr. Abernathy's murderer." The crowd gasped. Mayor Thorne tried to laugh. "This is absurd. Everyone knows the murderer is that girl." "Really?" William dismounted. He pulled the label and the cufflink from his pocket. "Then, perhaps you can explain how your son's personal cufflink ended up at the crime scene, and how this label with the dosage, which your son tore from the vial to hide the evidence, ended up in Snake Canyon, where he went this morning to destroy it." Every one of William's words was a hammer blow. He told them everything, the motive, the argument, the attempt to cover his tracks. Mayor Thorne's face became a stone mask of hatred. "It's all lies. You can't prove it." "I can," came a quiet but firm voice. Everyone turned. Pushing through the crowd towards the porch was the undertaker, Silas Blackwood. For the first time in his life, he looked not frightened, but dignified. "I prepared Mr. Abernathy's body," he said, looking directly at the mayor, "and I saw the bruise on his neck, and his jaw was clenched. Those are not signs of death by opium. They are signs of a struggle. Someone forcibly poured poison down his throat. I told the sheriff, but he ordered me to keep quiet. That was it. The final nail in the coffin of the Thorne's lies." The crowd, which just yesterday had been eager to lynch Sarah, now stared with hatred at the mayor and his son. Sheriff Henderson, realizing the game was lost, tried to slip away unnoticed, but was stopped by the stern glares of his former neighbors. At that moment, Jedediah, whom William had pulled from the horse and thrown to the ground, began to stir. Waking up in the middle of an angry mob, seeing the evidence in William's hands and hearing the accusations, he finally broke. He sobbed like a child and, through his tears, screamed out his confession, blaming Sarah for provoking him and his father for always covering for him. Justice, which had been blind and deaf in Red Creek for so long, finally had its sight restored. It was not in the law written on paper, but in the eyes of the people who understood how cruelly they had been deceived. Mayor Thorne and his son were arrested. Sheriff Henderson was run out of town in disgrace. For Sarah Collins, the nightmare was over. Her name was cleared. A few days later, William and Sarah stood on the porch of his house. The town was returning to its normal life, but something had subtly changed. When people met them, they would lower their eyes in shame, but there was also respect in their gazes. "What will you do now?" William asked. Sarah looked out at the endless prairies stretching to the horizon. "I thought about leaving, starting over, but then I realized, my home is here. There are people here who need help, and there is a man here who believed me when the whole world turned its back on me." She turned to him, and in her eyes, he saw not just gratitude, but the beginning of something new and beautiful. He knew that his quiet, orderly life had ended forever the night he opened the door for her, and he was incredibly glad for it. The story of Sarah and William became a legend in Red Creek, a legend that even the darkest night is followed by dawn, and that the truth, even if someone tries to bury it, will always find a way to grow. It was a story of courage that proved stronger than the hatred of a mob. If this story moved you, let us know by giving it a like, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories about people who were not afraid to go against the whole world for the sake of justice.